want to now go to Sonia Shaw, who is an investigative journalist, who has written a number of articles talking about the long-term impact of the destruction of wildlife habitats on human health. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with the crisis that we're in? What does that have to do with pandemics? Well, actually, it has a whole lot to do with pandemics. Sonia, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, what's the story here?
So, I wrote a book that came out in 2016 looking at pandemics and where they come from. And what I wanted to do is sort of do the backstory, so not starting with the epidemic, but look at how does a microbe actually turn into a pathogen that can cause all the death and disruption of a pandemic. And what I've found is that over the past 50 years or so, we've had over 300 of these new pathogens either emerge out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, or kind of reemerge into new places. So coronavirus is really just the latest in a long line. Like, we've had Ebola in West Africa, where it had never been seen before. We've had Zika in the Americas, where it had never been seen before. We have new kinds of tick-borne illnesses, new kinds of mosquito-borne pathogens, new kinds of antibiotic-resistant bacterial pathogens, and the list goes on and on. And about 60% of these new pathogens come from the bodies of animals. About 70% of those come from the bodies of wild animals. And that's not because wild animals are especially infested with pathogens. Most of these microbes are actually harmless in the bodies of the animals that carry them. What's happening is that humans are invading wildlife habitat and destroying so much of it that, animals have to squeeze into the little fragments we leave behind. We've covered over half of the planet with our cities, towns, mines, farms, etc. In the last few decades, I think we've expanded even another 20% or so. And of course, that means we lose a lot of wildlife, which is why we're in the sixth extinction, with hundreds of species going extinct every year. But, a lot of the ones that stay have to cram into these smaller and smaller fragments. And, when you cut down a forest where the bats live far away, they don't just disappear. They come and live in your backyard and your farm and your garden instead. And what we now see is that makes the probability of a person coming into novel, intimate contact with the animal more likely, whether it's, a casual contact because there's a bat that lives in your backyard and your son goes out and plays with a piece of fruit that has some bat saliva on it, or it just makes it easier to hunt for bats or to trade in wildlife, or all of those things that we know are responsible for bringing new pathogens into human populations. So we're basically building the highways for these microbes to transfer into our bodies and become pathogenic, which is why experts have been warning for years that a pandemic of the scale that we're seeing today would happen.
I recently saw again, I guess everybody is looking at these types of movies, the movie Contagion. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
And I think it was, sadly enough, kind of accurate in terms of predicting what would happen right now. It was about a bat driven away. There was deforestation. The bat went to an area where human beings are. I can't remember if it was feces or saliva. Go into areas where pigs were eating. And then you got some cook working with the pig, preparing the pig, then shaking hands with the person, and you're off and running. Is that kind of the things that we have to worry about?
Yeah, it's those kind of contacts through hunting and trading with wildlife, because all of these different wild species are in closer to where we live now, because we are taking over so much landscape and destroying where they live. But it's also what we're replacing wildlife habitat with, things like industrial farming, right? So these giant factory farms with chickens, hundreds of thousands or millions of chickens together is another risk factor. We're getting more antibiotic-resistant pathogens from factory farming, and then we're also getting more viruses like avian influenza, which is an influenza, a virus of wild waterfowl. It doesn't make them sick, but when that virus gets into a factory farm full of captive chickens, it starts to replicate and mutate and becomes more virulent. And a lot of this is why we're having even more avian influenza viruses emerging today. Some of them are highly pathogenic, and some of them can even infect humans. So it's sort of a combination of things. But in the end, it's really all about the industrial expansion that we've been experiencing, since World War II, essentially, thanks to fossil fuels.
It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that unless we got a handle on this, there is no reason to believe that this current pandemic will be the last or even necessarily the worst. Is that true?
I think that's true. Yeah, I think that absolutely. I think most experts would agree that, when I was putting my book Pandemic together, I would ask all the experts I talked to tell me sort of which pathogen kept them up at night. And they would come up with two. One was a respiratory virus that was just a little bit more deadly than the flu, which is exactly what we're seeing today with the coronavirus. And the second one they said was an antibiotic-resistant bacterial pathogen, a superbug that would essentially bring medicine to a standstill because even routine surgeries would not be possible. It wouldn't be worth the risk of an unstoppable infection. And we are nearly at that point already.
Okay. Sonia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll get back to you in a minute. I want to turn now to Dr.